Demonology Warlock time. This class is pretty OP. As usual, we're going in this heroic dungeon with a reasonable eye level, not using any what are those called? Covenant abilities or legendaries or any of that stuff. In this case, everyone's pretty good eye level except for the tank is certainly overgeared. Just gotta go with what we get. So the Demonology Warlock is very strong, does not take much skill. Mainly the cult Dreadstalkers is OP. What are our tanks actually at for item level? 257. I guess he's not as overgeared as I thought. But 240 eye level is kind of the point where you should be going to mythic dungeons. You can see from his gear, he has literally 0 slots that are less than 249 item level.
Look what we have here! Fresh meat!
And he's one of these tanks. Oh my god. Gonna have to use our burning rush to try to keep up with this guy. Getting all of them? Looks like it. So yeah, Dreadstalkers is OP. You want to cast that as much as possible.
I'll catch something good! Open you up! Open you up! Need better!
Our challengers have passed the first trials, but they're still a long way from the title!
So yeah, since we're trying to keep up with this high-speed tank, I'm not really gonna be able to talk too much about rotations at the moment.
Challenges. Ha! We'll see how long you can last.
Glory will
Damn it. Explosion, I guess. So yeah, when you're not casting Dreadstalkers, like when it's on cooldown, you're spending your soul shards on Hand of Gul'dan, which summons this little purple meteor thing and summons these wild imps that attack.
You had best make this interesting. Prepare before the storm. Can you match my strength? Fight for glory!
And no PvP again.
My blade knows no equal. That was a good.
Yeah, so you're using Hand of Gul'dan to summon the meteor for more imps, but in the grand scheme of things, imps only do like 10% of your damage.
Mortal lives are so fleeting, so fragile.
So yeah, imps don't really do much damage, but what imps do for you is there's a percent chance of when they die that you get this buff called Demonic Core, which makes your demon bolts instant cast. Because Demon Bolt does some damage, and it also gives you 2 soul shards. So, comparing that to Shadow Bolt, which gives you 1 soul shard. Instant cast Demon Bolt is how you want to be spending, or how you want to be generating, the soul shards. Since you need soul shards for your Dreadstalkers, and then of course, again, for your End of Gul'dan. So it's kind of this feedback loop thing going on. Oh no! That sucked. So there's this curse thing that drops this swirly fear puddle on the ground. But if you don't move out of it, you are feared in place. So I got feared by that because I was just trying to get my cast off and then dodge the black knockback tornado thing. But since I got feared, I couldn't move to dodge the tornado and got knocked off by that. Why do you even go left on here anyways? So many people die from those tornadoes that standard practice is to go right. Did you not even hit the thing? Study.
Your souls are mine to claim. Let your fears consume you. There is no escape for you. Relinquish your soul. Let your fears consume you. I will rip your soul from your body!
Oh, I don't have my pet out.
This does not end here!
I gotta resummon my pet since I died. I forgot.
Return to the central chamber. It's time to begin the main event. Soldiers of Maldraxxus, are you ready for some carnage? A rising stars now face the longest reigning champion the theater of
They're one of those AFK frickin' paladins.
the endless empress.
At long last, a worthy contender.
Yeah, we should have kicked this paladin.
Behold my
He's
power
basically AFK.
and despair. My magic reaches beyond. Gravity turns its ire against you. My magic
Yeah.
reaches beyond your mortal.
I realized too late. I didn't summon my demonic tyrant early enough.
Yes! Muldretha has been defeated! I can hardly believe it! All hail the new champions of the arena!
I don't know what sinful brand is. Random enemy of the mark of the Venthyr. Oh, okay, so that's a covenant ability. Just curious as to how he was doing as much damage as he was as a tank. So he's using the covenant ability, and he's also using a DPS totem, which does quite a bit of damage.
Beneath your feet!
But yeah, anyways, boss fights. First boss fight is the 3 dudes. As a Demonology Warlock, you're pretty good at single target and multi-target kind of stuff. Because the Dreadstalkers, the Dreadbite thing, it's AoE. The Dreadbite attack now hits all targets within 8 yards with this talent. So single target or multi-target, you do pretty good damage because the Dreadstalkers, like, typically your top damage. Yeah. So we did fine there. I didn't realize till the end the paladin here was our DPS guy. Our healer was this evoker here. So that paladin was basically AFK. He only cast judgment and consecration and a he got a what's that called? A trinket proc. So yeah, basically AFK DPS paladin. So yeah, the tank was doing lots of damage. Of course, he was like 50 or 60 item levels above me. But yeah. Compared to other people, we're doing just dandy. Yeah. Not a lot to say. We got I'll go over the abilities here in a second. Like I said, your Dreadstalker is good. Your Fellstorm will show up as a lot of damage. That's your pet dude's whirlwind thing. It'll show up as a lot of damage if you get this demonic strength talent. It gives them a 400% increased damage Fellstorm on a 1-minute cooldown. So that's a very large source of burst AoE. And yeah, there's a bunch of extra little things that are part of our main rotation stuff. So yeah, we'll look at these other bosses real quick here. We got yeah, these DPS meters are basically all looking the same except for this one. So I had died from the from the tornado thing and forgot I needed to resummon my pet. So I was trying to do stuff and then didn't realize it wasn't working because my pet didn't. I hadn't summoned my pet. So yeah. And then of course I got my soul sucked. So that boss fight definitely did not go well. And the last boss fight, the Warlock doesn't have any cast while moving type of thing. So really you're like doing some instant cast stuff which allows you to move during that global cooldown of the instant cast a little bit. But for the most part, you are not casting while moving. So for when the boss channels the big dark tornado thing, I had to move out of the way of that. And then when he casts the big black hole thing that sucks you towards it, I didn't do too well on that. What I did do beforehand, though, was I created the demonic circle so that when I got sucked off to the side a bit, then I teleported back to the circle so that I could spend more time standing still casting while I got dragged away. And then teleport back and then keep casting. But yeah, still not ideal as far as class isn't that good for being able to cast while moving. But also what happened was I called my Dreadstalkers out on that last boss fight, and then I didn't realize too late I needed to summon my Demonic Tyrant, because the Demonic Tyrant, what it does is it increases the duration of your demons. So since Dreadstalkers is the largest percentage of your damage, it's very important to summon the Demonic Tyrant while your Dreadstalkers are out. That's now obviously it's great if you can also summon the Demonic Tyrant while you have like 10 or more imps out at the same time, and you have Dreadstalkers out. Or even better is if you get a reset. Shadow Bolt and Demon Bolt have a 5% chance to reset the cooldown of Dreadstalkers with the talent over here. So if you have Dreadstalkers out and you get a quick reset on Dreadstalkers and you can cast it again, then you have 2 sets of Dreadstalkers out, and then you can cast Summon Demonic Tyrant. That's like the jackpot as far as value out of Demonic Tyrant. But the main thing is you want to use it while you have Dreadstalkers out, because the damage of Demonic Tyrant itself is very low. Like if we look in our overall data, Demonic Tyrant, let's do this way. Demonic Tyrant only did 91k damage out of our 4.24 million. So it was the Demonic Tyrant itself is what does that work out to be? 1 in 42 basically, like 2%. I think there's percents at the bottom. I think that's Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was percentage of all pet damage or percentage of all my damage. Trying to add up the numbers here. 10, 16, 16 plus 66. Yeah, I guess that's percent of all damage. So, yeah. Demonic Tyrant does 2% of all my damage. The more the value comes from the extending the duration of your other demons, most notably, like I said, the Dreadstalkers. So on that last boss fight, what happened was I had some of the Dreadstalkers, and I was casting some other spells first, and then I was like, oh shit, I need to summon my Demonic Tyrant. But the Dreadstalkers were expiring at that point. Or they had just expired, somewhere around there. Cause I don't know if there's a better way to do this with like a weak aura or something. But the way I know when my Dreadstalkers are expired or not is it's a 20-second cooldown. They last 12 seconds. So I watched the cooldown thing. So basically you need to be casting Demonic Tyrant before the cooldown is halfway up. Otherwise, your Demonic Tyrant won't be out in time. Because the cast of Demonic Tyrant is a 1.8 second cast. So basically you have to start casting it before the cooldown of Dreadstalkers is halfway up. Otherwise, your Dreadstalkers despawn and then their duration isn't extended. So, yeah. Very important. Keep those Dreadstalkers up. So yeah. Overall damage. Like I said, Dreadstalkers are number 1, and that's just with the Dread Bite. It's 26.5% of the damage. They also have the melee attack on there, which is another 8.3% of my damage. So the Dreadstalkers are about a third of my overall damage. Very, very strong. After that, for overall damage, is the Fellstorm. Like I said, is you get this talent here, Demonic Strength. Gives you this 1 minute cooldown button to have a 400% extra damage Fellstorm, so that you have Giga Burst AoE damage, basically. They normally do what is this? Let's see. Normally around 1400-ish for the Fellstorm with my current level of gear. And then with a 400% extra damage, that's a 5 times amount. So it becomes a, what's that, 7,000 damage Fellstorm. Really good. So that's why that's very high on our damage. But also it's pretty sure it combines with the regular Fellstorm. There's also a Fellstorm Felguard farther down there. That's from a different thing. We'll get to it. We'll get to it. But anyways, after those two things, we have Wild Imps doing about 8% of my total damage. Like I said, you're constantly summoning these Wild Imps, and you've got 10 or more of them following you around at some points, but overall, they're like 10% or less of your damage. It's a bit more in single target situations, like 12% on bosses. 16% on this boss, so it definitely varies. But grand scheme of things, overall damage in a dungeon, not that great. So yeah. Then we got Legion Strike. That's just a ability on your pet. Like I said, never really mentioned. So for the Demonology Warlock, they're the only Warlock spec that gets this Felguard pet. And the Felguard is your best DPS pet. So you always want the Felguard, and as you've seen here, you have things in your tree that are very specific to your Felguard pet. There may be a time where you really need to interrupt, so you might bust out your Fell Hunter pet. Or you really need the cleanse thing, so you bust out the imp pet or whatever. But 99% of the time, you're gonna be using your Felguard because that's a important chunk of your damage. Let's see what else. Alright, after the Legion Strike, we've got Hand of Gul'dan. That's the meteor thing that summons more wild imps. It only comes out to 7% of your damage, even though you're casting it quite a lot, so yeah, that's how it is. It is a AoE damage, but it's just not very much. So here it says, deals up to 1300 Shadow Flame damage on impact to all enemies within 8 yards of the target. So the average damage of it, including crits, the average damage is 1800 damage. So very unimpressive as far as damage goes, but that's because it summons imps. And like we saw, imps aren't themselves great, but they do something. Yeah. So then after that, we've got Demon Bolt is 4.7% of my damage. And that's, like I said, you get the Demonic Core passive, or buff. The Demonic Core buff sometimes when your imps die, which makes it instant cast. Also, when your Dreadstalkers despawn, you get a Demonic Core buff. So, it's a 4.1 second cast, as it is. Assuming that goes down with haste. So yeah. That's 4.1 second cast for 2 soul shards, compared to a 1.8 second cast for 1 soul shard. And the damage of Shadow Bolt is almost the same as the Demon Bolt. So, both for DPS and for generating soul shards, Shadow Bolt is better than Demon Bolt, unless you have the Demonic Core to make it instant cast. So, in that way, it's a lot like the Fire Mage, where Pyroblast for the Fire Mage is essentially a button that you never press unless you have it as an instant cast Pyroblast. Because otherwise, Fireball is better DPS. So yeah. So yeah. So that's why Demon Bolt, you're using it quite a bit because of the whole feedback loop of your after you've summoned your Dreadstalkers, you're spending all your soul shards on Hand of Gul'dan to summon more imps, and then as those imps die, some of them give you more demonic cores for instant cast demon bolts, which give your soul shards up so that you can cast more meteors. You get more imps, so you get more soul demonic cores buffs, so you get more instant cast demon bolts, and that just loops on itself essentially in a way that you build up to kind of more imps basically. So since it's random whether or not the imps when they despawn give you the demonic core, sometimes you'll get lucky and then your imp count will build up even higher. Other times you'll be unlucky and then you end up having to cast more shadow bolts because you run out of demonic cores. So when that happens, then your imp count goes down. So yeah. Ideally though, you essentially have this infinite supply of demonic cores and you don't cast Shadow Bolt. This is why Shadow Bolt on here is down at only 1%, or sorry, 1.8% of my total damage in the dungeon. We only had a total of 40 casts of Shadow Bolt. Compared to Demon Bolt, we had 108 casts of Demon Bolt. And like I said, that's because you're always casting it when you have the demonic core buff. In the dungeon, we had a total of how many demonic cores? 43 plus 164, 207 demonic cores. So as you can see, I didn't manage to actually use them all. Sometimes you have some at the end of like a boss fight, and then it's a buff with a duration on it. So you do sometimes get into situations where you like between trash packs running around, like at the end of a fight you have a couple demonic core buffs still, and then it expires before you get to use them on the next trash pack. So yeah, you don't usually get to use them all in a dungeon, but you're trying to use most of them basically. They stack up to 4 demonic cores. So I have on my interface a little thing for telling me how many they have, and it's got a little cooldown swipe so I know when they're gonna expire. But basically when you have, like, let's look like right now, for example, you have 3 soul shards. Let's say if I had a few stacks of demonic core right now, and I was in combat with something, well, I could call Dreadstalkers, and I could use Hand of Gul'dan, but I could also use the instant cast Demon Bolt to spend one of those demonic cores. So that's something you might consider doing, just because you want to use your demonic core because there's a chance you won't be able to use it. It might despawn, or the buff might expire, I should say, before you get to use them all. Or the other thing is, if you have multiple demonic cores, like I was saying, say a couple more of your imps die, and then they would both give you demonic cores, but you only had three. You already had 3 demonic cores. Then then you go over the cap essentially, and since you're capped at 4, then you essentially lose a demonic core because of that. So it'll refresh the cooldown at 4 demonic cores, but you won't get that 5th demonic core. So, yeah, you generally want to use your demonic cores while you can, for those reasons. So when I say while you can, the damage of the demon bolts is pretty low. So it's not like use your demonic cores when you're already at full soul shards type of thing. When I say use your demonic cores, I mean you basically, if you're at 3 or fewer soul shards, you generally want to use your demonic cores. So yeah, that's kind of the whole game that you got to play as far as doing your demonic cores usage. I like this talent over here. Instantly sacrifice 2 wild imps to generate 2 charges of demonic core. I like that talent. With the other one here, you passively summon a wild imp to fight for you every 12 seconds. I only have 1 point in here. It's actually a 2-point thing. But the second point has a lot less value in it, so I don't recommend putting the second point in there. But basically, with that, you basically always have 2 wild imps, except for this part where one despawns, and then another one spawns a couple seconds later. So apart from that little short gap between them despawning and respawning a new one, you've always got 2 demonic imps. So you want to specifically, though, you want to make sure you use this while you have at least 2 imps. So if you use it right after one despawns, like now, then you only get the 1 demonic core charge. So it's very important that you have at least 2 imps for this when you use this. So because each imp gives you a demonic core, you're sacrificing 2 imps for 2 demonic cores, which is 2 instant cast demon bolts, which is 4 soul shards, which ends up as 4 more wild imps worth from hand to cooldown. So it's you're sacrificing 2 imps now to have 4 imps later, basically, is what that talent gives you. So I really like it, specifically at the start of the fight, where you don't have any demonic cores yet, and you don't have enough imps to really start getting a bunch of demonic cores from them expiring. So, yeah, I really like that talent. We're getting an implosion over here. I pretty much don't use it, but if you look at the damage of the imps, the damage of the imps is averages around 200-ish at my gear level, and that's like every couple seconds. So since these guys last only like 20 seconds or something, each imp does during its lifetime only like 2k damage or something. I don't know what the exact number is. 2k sounds reasonable though as an estimate to me, so I could be a bit off on that number, but at my current gear level, I think 2k is about a good estimate. But what that means though is that if you look at implosion, you're sacrificing your imps to do several hundred damage as AoE. So it's a pretty decent amount of damage compared to your imp's single target damage. And then also with the talent, you theoretically, I haven't actually tested this, but theoretically, when you're using implosion to sacrifice all your imps at once for AoE damage, there's a higher percentage chance of them giving you demonic cores. So, usually you get a few demonic cores when you sacrifice a bunch of imps. So it's pretty decent. As far as that's concerned, when you're using it, so basically you can use that and it'll be decent value in an AoE situation. For single target, it's better just to have your imps in general just cast their spells, but like at the end of the fight type of thing, or if you happen to know a bunch of your imps are about to expire, then you can get more value out of the implosion rather than just letting them expire on their casting their firebolt things. So yeah, a bunch of these talents are very important. I think out of all the ones I've got here, the least important talent I'd say is this one, Grimoire Felguard. It summons a more powerful Felguard, but it's a 2-minute cooldown, and in total damage it only does about as much as a single cast of Called Dreadstalkers. So for a 2-minute cooldown, it feels pretty weak. It is sort of semi burst single target damage. I mean, it's over 17 seconds. It's not that impressive, really. So in total, see how much damage it does. 3% of my damage. So it's not great. That's still not terrible either, though. But I wish there were other more compelling talent choices instead. Apart from that, pretty much everything is really important. I already talked about Implosion, the Power Siphon, the higher chance to get demonic cores. Hand of Gul'dan has a chance to generate a charge of demonic core. So basically we're getting as much demonic cores as possible to have to cast, so that we get more instant cast demon bolts and have to cast fewer shadow bolts. This one gives you stronger Dreadstalkers, so that's great. The Wild Imp one, let's see. More Dreadstalker damage. The big AoE one we talked about. Felguard damage. It's Felguard. That's like my named Felguard there. Like I said, it's a pretty significant amount of my damage just behind the Dreadstalkers. Largely because of that demonic strength empowered Fellstorm thing. So this is a pretty good talent point, but you have to get it anyways to get this other one for Fellstorm and Dreadbite damage for more Dreadstalkers damage. So that's cool. This is another 2-point talent, which I've only spent 1 point in. Shadow Bolt and Demon Bolt have a 10% chance to make your next call Dreadstalkers cost 2 fewer soul shards and have no cast time. So the reason why this is a 1 point, this is a much better value for a 1 point, is because called Dreadstalkers, it gets reset so infrequently that usually you are using like 5 or more demon bolts between each cast of Dreadstalkers, or shadow bolts if you don't have any demonic cores for it. So what happens is that your called Dreadstalkers, there's a good chance, just with this 10% chance, that you get the free proc out of it. Because if you spend both points to get the 20% chance, then it'll be much more likely that it procs multiple times, which ends up being a waste, basically. Because it doesn't stack. So there's very little value out of spending a second point in this talent. So that's why I've only spent 1. Alright. Hand of Gul'dan damage. And possible soul shard refunding. That's not too exciting, but the way we're pathed on here, we need this point so that we can get all Dreadstalkers has a 100% chance to summon an additional Dreadstalker. So you spend 2 points here and your Dreadstalker damage goes up by 50%. So very important. And then obviously we're getting to Demonic Tyrant from there. So even though this isn't too exciting, these are very important, and that's how we're getting to it. Yeah, can't get to it through Doom, because these are both 2 talent points. things that I've spent only one talent point into. So I can't get Doom without spending another talent point in one of these first. So Doom is not very good for dungeons because it deals damage after 18 seconds, and that's when it generates the soul shard. Doom's really a raid type of thing. And I don't know if it's even viable. But for raids, you use it just because the 18 seconds, you can't really afford to wait around 18 seconds for your soul shard in a dungeon, because things die much faster. So it'd be generally kind of useless in a dungeon. Yeah. So it's sort of like Shadow Bolt in that it generates one soul shard, but you can only use it every 18 seconds, and then it does a couple thousand more damage than Shadow Bolt. But yeah, it's just not very appealing the way it is. If it generated 2 soul shards, I would think it would be pretty good, like in raids. But all that waiting just for 1 soul shard seems really bad to me. And like I said, particularly in a dungeon because it's 18 seconds. But even in a raid, you're spending a point here to get essentially a couple thousand damage that extra than what you would spend in a Shadow Bolt. So it's probably best in a raid where there's multiple enemies that will survive longer than 18 seconds. But yeah, I don't think this is very good right now. Anyways, other talents that we need are Shadow Bolt and Demon Bolt has a 5% chance to reset the cooldown of Call Dreadstalkers. This is only 5% for 2 points. So I'm not actually sure if this works out to be very good, even though Dreadstalkers are a third of your damage. We could look at it actually. So Shadow Bolt and Demon Bolt have a 5% chance. We could count how many total Shadow Bolts and Demon Bolts did I cast? And we say, okay, I have 108 casts of Demon Bolt and 40 casts of Shadow Bolt. So 148 casts times 5%, which is 0.05. So I got somewhere around 7.4 resets of Call Dreadstalkers. Or that's like the expected amount. I just thought maybe there's a buff for this. Sounds of War. Possible. That's the instant cast one. That's not the one we want. Yeah, I don't see a buff that tells you that your Dreadstalker's cooldown got reset. Some abilities in the game, they have a buff for that, but it looks like we don't in this case. So we essentially we reset the cooldown of Called Dreadstalkers somewhere around 7.4 times expected. Now that doesn't mean we got 20 seconds cooldown worth off of it. So on average, we would have got like maybe 10 seconds cooldown reduced, basically. So we would have got like 3 or 4 maybe extra casts of Called Dreadstalkers out of those 2 talent points. The thing on here, there isn't like a Called Dreadstalkers thing for me to know. Maybe there's some other way to find out this information, but I don't know how many times I actually cast the Called Dreadstalker spell. So I don't know how much a few extra casts of Called Dreadstalkers is as far as like percentage of my damage goes. So yeah, all in all, I don't know if these points are really that good or not. But I like them just as far as that lottery situation I was talking about earlier, where you hit the jackpot if you call Dreadstalkers, and then you get a reset really quickly so that you have 2 sets of Dreadstalkers out at the same time, and then you cast your Demonic Tyrant to increase the duration of both sets. So yeah. Your last talents down here that I have in this build, more Felguard damage. There's also this thing for Soul Strike. Soul Strike is a ability over here that I don't get. I used to get this back in, I think, BFA. And it's a slightly better Shadow Bolt, essentially. The damage is slightly more, and it's instant cast instead of you having to stand there casting a 1.8 second cast Shadow Bolt. So it's not terrible. But you can see from my action bars, they are pretty full. So having to manually press that button in addition to all your other buttons, it's just too much. So that's why I am avoiding that in particular. Otherwise, I would be getting it for the synergy with this talent. Probably instead of the Grimoire Felguard. I'm not really sure. The Grimoire Felguard, like I said, it comes out to be 3% of my total damage, so that's really actually not that bad. I thought it was worse, but 3% is not that bad. So yeah, maybe Soul Strike isn't worth it. There's also this Summon Vile Fiend over here. That thing is pretty weak. Like, surprisingly weak for a 45-second cooldown. So, don't get that. Anyways, while your Felguard is active, your Wild Imps and Dreadstalkers do 10% additional damage. Hey, what do you know? Like I said earlier, you want to use your Felguard 99% of the time. This is another reason why. And then the last one, your Felguard hurls his axe and does a bunch of AoE damage. This is a 45-second AoE damage cooldown. I don't think I used it very much. And the reason is there's a bit of what's the right word for this? User unfriendliness, I guess, or quality of life type of problems where your Felguard doesn't do things you tell it to unless it's close enough to them, to the target, basically. So like if your Felguard's attacking this coyote over here and you wanted to use your demonic strength extra powered Fellstorm on a group of enemies that's over here, then your Felguard's got to like run over here first before it does the Fellstorm thing, the empowered Fellstorm. Or you also have situations where your Felguard at the start of battle, your Felguard runs in there and it does its regular Fellstorm right away in a group of enemies. And while it's doing its regular Fellstorm, pressing the button for the empowered Fellstorm doesn't do anything. So I assume the developers don't want you accidentally canceling your regular Fellstorm for the empowered Fellstorm, because then you like lose out on some of your damage. But it's just kind of this annoyance thing where you're like pressing this button and nothing happens. Whoops. Don't go. So yeah, you're pressing the button and nothing happens because of those problems. And then similarly with this guillotine ability, it's a similar problem where it doesn't seem to work while your guy is Fellstorming. So you can't like overlap these both of these abilities, which are both a burst AoE type of ability. So yeah, kind of your priorities when there's a pack of monsters is you want to use your demonic strength empowered Fellstorm, ideally, and you want to use your called Dreadstalkers because their Dreadbite thing is AoE. And then you can't use the guillotine ability right away because of the conflict with the other abilities of your Felguard. So because of that, guillotine comes out to be fairly low on the damage meter, I think. Is it even on here? I don't know how many times I actually cast it. Part of it does AoE on the ground, which isn't very much, but also it increases their your pet's attack speed and makes the regular attacks cleave. So part of the damage of guillotine is in the melee attacks of the Felguard pet, whose name is Rinminul or whatever on here. So part of his melee damage is from that guillotine. I don't know why I'm not seeing guillotine on here though. they call it something else or what? Maybe it's fell explosion? Yeah, it must be this fell explosion thing. So, yeah. It's not a lot of damage. But yeah. It basically gets overshadowed by your empowered Fellstorm thing. So not a very important point, but also I didn't use it a whole lot because of its conflicts with the other abilities, and then sometimes I just forget to press it. Yeah, so yeah. In summary, the Demonology Warlock is kind of the OP spec as far as just simple goes. There's a lot going on as far as you can do a lot with other Warlock specs as well. People are particularly doing a lot of damage when they're using their like Shadowlands covenants and crap, but I don't care about that. So to me, the Demonology Warlock currently feels the strongest, and it's a very simple rotation type of thing of all your Dreadstalkers. Spend, when you have 3 or more soul shards, use Hand of Gul'dan. Use Demon Bolt if you have demonic cores. Otherwise, use Shadow Bolts to build your soul shards. And you just repeat that primary cycle with a couple extra buttons for like burst damage, for burst AoE stuff, and the empowered fellow guard guy over there for single target, and the demonic tyrant basically whenever you have Dreadstalkers out to just increase their duration so that they deal more damage. It's all good stuff. And yeah, I implosioned very little. Let's show how many times I cast implosion. I only cast 1 cast of implosion. So yeah, it's implosion isn't that great. It's kind of a end of the fight type of ability to just get a little more value out of your imps than auto attacking, but yeah, not that great. I want to talk any other things on the talent tree that I'm not getting. From what I've seen, this talent seems really weak because you, as the caster, are only doing like a third of your total damage. So damage increased that's like taken from you is basically only applying to your meteor thing, Hand of Gul'dan, your Dreadbolts, and your Shadow Bolts. It's very weak. I assume Shadow Flame damage includes all of those. Shadow Flame damage is Hand of Gul'dan. Shadow Flame damage on Demon Bolt. Shadow damage on Shadow Bolt. I think it probably includes Shadow Bolt. But basically 20% extra damage of, yeah, what's essentially like a quarter of your overall damage. is I don't know. Seems pretty weak. Maybe it does actually work out to be a few percent of your damage, in which case it would be possibly worth it. I'm really just all about increasing the damage of my pets. And the main reason for that is because your mastery increases the damage done by your demons. So as you get better and better gear, this skews your damage more and more towards your pets rather than your shadow bolts and your demon bolts and your hand of Gul'dan. So basically I try to avoid essentially anything that increases shadow bolt or demon bolt damage because of that, or hand of Gul'dan damage. Cooldown of Fellstorm isn't too important because the basic Fellstorm is fairly weak. So a change from that to a 20-second cooldown doesn't really do a whole lot. Because the empowered Fellstorm thing ignores the cooldown of the regular Fellstorm. Each time Fellstorm deals damage, increases damage taken. It's not too great. It's an 8-second thing. Your Fellstorm lasts a certain number of seconds, so the buff uptime of that would be, or the debuff uptime of that would be somewhere around a third of the time. So yeah, it's not that great. Let's see, stuff over here for Doom. Increase damage for each active pet you have. Doesn't sound too bad. Like I said, it's Doom's a whole raid type of thing. It's not I have no interest in even trying it in a dungeon because things it's like a long-term benefit.
I will break the land.
When you summon Dreadstalkers fade away, they increase the damage of your Demon Bolt by 10% for 8 seconds. Demon Bolt, like I said, is like for 4.7% of my total damage, so 10% extra damage on Demon Bolt for a portion of the time is like a very, very small damage increase from this talent, so that talent's pretty garbage. Shadow Bolt increases damage of Demon Bolt. Again, we only cast Shadow Bolt 40 times in the whole dungeon. And Demon Bolt's increasing damage by 7%. Very weak. So that talent's garbage. Summoning a Wild Imp has a chance to do Imp Gang Boss instead. This is probably the best way to get down to this Nether Portal ability, which I've been wanting to try, but the Dreadstalker / Felguard build feels really strong, so I can't really justify going this way. I'd have to do, like, get rid of some of these Felguard abilities, basically. And then I could go like that. And I guess I have one more point still. So it's possible I could get rid of some of this Felguard stuff and try that. But It's a 3-minute cooldown. So I don't know if it's that good. It's like something you use only on boss fights, and it would give you a ton of little minions, but I don't know if it really ends up being worth it. Something I'd need to play around with. This talent here and this talent here for Shadow Bolts and Demon Bolt deal additional damage are significant enough that they may be worth it. But the other talents farther up here for Shadow Bolt and Demon Bolt damage are definitely not worth it, at least not without these other talents. So extra damage per demon pet, and a way for you get an occasional extra strong demon bolt and shadow bolt. Don't seem too bad. And then summon your demonic tyrant gives you soul shards is okay. Because usually what happens when you're summoning your demonic tyrant, you want it when you have as many pets as possible, so you usually build up a bunch of imps, and then when you also have your Dreadstalkers up, then you want to cast Demonic Tyrant. So if you had soul shards already, then you spent them to summon more imps. So usually you would be generally at 0 soul shards when you cast Demonic Tyrant, but I don't like that you have to spend 2 points here for it to generate 5 soul shards. Because it's not like those soul shards really do you a whole lot of good. It saves you theoretically from casting some shadow bolts. But yeah, these points are pretty weak. And then down here, every soul shard you spend reduces the cooldown of summon demonic tyrant by 0.6 seconds. So basically every Hand of Gul'dan cast is 3 soul shards that we spent. We cast it 81 times. So 81 times 3 is 243 soul shards spent essentially on Hand of Gul'dan. And then also we spent a bunch on Called Dreadstalker, but I don't know how many we spent. And also some of those were with the free cost of Summon Dreadstalker. What was that buff called? Demonic Calling. This one. So yeah. We might have spent maybe another 40 or something soul shards on all Dreadstalkers. I'm not really sure. So yeah, let's say 280 soul shards spent in total. And then 0.6 seconds, 280 times 0.6. Let's just bring up the calculator. So we would have possibly reduced the cooldown of Demonic Tyrant by 2.5 minutes. on a 1.5 minute cooldown spell, so we would have got maybe 2 extra casts of Demonic Tyrant in the whole dungeon from this cooldown reduction thing. Obviously, I wasn't even really using the ability on cooldown in the first place, so I don't think this talent's very good. And then this other one, Active Wild Imps give you this thing where Demonic Tyrant itself does extra damage, essentially based on how many demons are out when you cast it. The amount on here isn't that much, so you'd get somewhere around maybe 50 to 100% extra damage on your Demonic Tyrant. So if we look at my overall Demonic Tyrant damage, it was 2% of my damage. So it's maybe an extra 1 to 2% of my overall damage with that talent point. So it's not terrible. It would certainly synergize better with a Nether Portal build where you have like extra minions out. But as far as going over here, definitely not very good. Hand of Gul'dan is a 5% chance to cast a second time on your target for free. I don't think that's too good. It's the math of Hand of Gul'dan damage and imp damage. It's basically 5% extra Hand of Gul'dan damage and imp damage. And because it'll be extra imps as well, that also means a few more demonic cores to give me a few more demon bolts and a few less shadow bolts. But it's a series of very small damage upgrades that probably don't add up to very much. When your wild imps expire or die, your other demons are inspired and gain a 1% additional damage. Hard to say if that is worth it. Another one of those things that maybe works out better with another portal build. I don't know. Your wild imps expire or die. Backing up to 10 times. I mean, at best case, it's 10% extra damage on your demons that are still alive, but you'd have to do like an implosion or something to get yourself 10% extra damage on your Dreadstalkers or something. It I don't know. This doesn't seem very good either. Like on average, it's probably gonna be 1 or 2% demon damage. As far as well, actually, you Hand of Gul'dan 3 soul shards generally, so you're getting 3 imps at a time. So generally, you have 3 imps expire at the same time. So I guess your Dreadstalkers will probably get 3% damage fairly quickly after they've been summoned, and then maybe a 6% and a 9% after that. I don't know if this is like permanent or some duration, because otherwise you have essentially permanent 10% damage on your main demon pet, your Felguard guy. So I don't know. The way I look at talents in general on most classes, something that's going to give you a 2% overall damage is generally pretty decent. And then sometimes you have talents that give you, usually active talents that give you like 5% more damage, and it's like, oh damn, that's a really good point. But for the most part, 2% is like a decent thing, and then anything less than 2% is what I'd consider weak. So like I said, when you look at Demonic Tyrant does about 2% of all my damage, but also increases the duration of my other demons so that those other demons are doing more damage as well. So it's more than a 2% to my overall damage. So yeah, that's just kind of how I look at things. Let's talk general Warlock tree, super quick. I'm really tired of talking. Burning Rush with the talent points to reduce the damage that you deal with to yourself is really useful. So that you can just, like I was trying to do in that dungeon, is trying to keep up with that damn Demon Hunter tank. So with those points, you get 60% move speed. It deals damage to you, like it directly costs health, so it ignores the absorb shields on you. So something to keep in mind. So yeah, reducing the damage that it does to you with these 2 points is worthwhile in my opinion. I like the curse stuff over here, particularly Curse of Tongues. Increases enemies' cast time, and you can amplify that curse so that it's even more cast time. So this combo is very strong on certain bosses that do a lot of casting, or also certain monsters that just do casting, which does a lot of damage. So I like those points. These points here for extra soul leech stuff. That's your like leech shield thing, which makes warlocks more tanky than a lot of other classes, like passively. That's really good. I'm a big fan of Mortal Coil because it heals you. The Horrify thing is just a bonus. Let's see. Demonic Gateway has its uses. Shadow Furies, the AoE stun thing, has its uses. Some of this other stuff is less important. Dark Pact is specifically with this talent here. Dark Pact only sacrifices 5% of your current health for the same shield value. So it sacrifices 5% of your current health to give you 8 times that amount as a shield. So if you're at full health, you sacrifice 5% of your health to get 40% of your health as a shield, plus an additional 4,000. Whereas 4,000 is almost 10% of my health in addition to that. So it's a massive shield with Dark Pact. It's only a 1-minute cooldown. I consider this to be overpowered currently. They actually nerfed it. But I still think it's overpowered. Um, it's more of a problem in PvP, of course, that it's overpowered. But it because of the part where the talent to reduce the amount that of life that you're sacrificing um is why it's really overpowered. It used to be like without this talent, it's like it sacrifices like 20% of your health to shield you for 40% of your health. Um so when it's like that, then it the cost of it using it is a lot more. Whereas so like if you use it and then you don't get any value out of the shield of it, then you're like at a net negative from the cost of the shield. Whereas once you get this talent, since the cost of it goes down to only 5% of your health, the cost is essentially negligible at that point. So it's very the talent here kind of ruins the design of the ability. So yeah, very overpowered. Um I didn't need to use it at all in that dungeon really, but very good for any time where you're about to take a whole bunch of damage to save yourself. Yeah. So that's pretty much it for Demonology Warlock here in the Dragonflight Prepatch. Um, deals a very good amount of damage. I'm not sure if it's the best caster class. I'm not sure if I'm ready to commit to that as far as like dungeon DPS goes. But it's definitely what I'd say a top tier type of thing. If I had a reliable way to really like measure these things, because I'm not gonna spend an hour on freaking like training dummies or something trying to figure out, oh, this does this much AoE damage and this other class does this much AoE damage, but this one's better at single target damage by 10% or something. I don't want to really get into the numbers, but as far as how strong it feels, I definitely put Demonology Warlock as a top tier caster DPS right now. I would say the Windwalker Monk is probably gonna beat it generally in dungeon damage. More because of mobility, and the Windwalker Monk needs less like setup to doing a bunch of damage on trash packs, essentially. You just run up, press a couple buttons, and then you have enough energy for your freaking Fist of Fury and deal insane damage as a Windwalker Monk very quickly. Whereas the Demonology Warlock, you can do kind of a bunch of damage up front, or fairly up front, with the Cauldred Stalkers and the Demonic Strength cooldown. But I think Windwalker Monk has a bit better is a bit better basically just for trash packs. Not too sure about single target damage. One Walker Monk's just freaking really strong all around. But yeah, as far as casters goes, Demonology Warlock, very, very strong. I feel like the caster that I've got the most experience on is the Arcane Mage. I'm not sure exactly how the Arcane Mage stacks up against the Demonology Warlock, though. Demonology Warlock doesn't have mana problems for sure when it comes to boss damage stuff. So, it probably wins there. But the Arcane Mage is very good at trash packs. But the Arcane Mage also has to generally get in a little closer to do arcane explosions. So sometimes that can be detrimental to the Arcane Mage. I don't know. We'll see. We'll have to play a bit more. But yeah. I wish I had a better way to directly compare all these builds I've been trying out. Kind of just have to go on feel and comparing my damage numbers to other players and trying to take into consideration item level differences, and I don't really know too much as far as skill goes, how well these guys are pressing their buttons for damage. It's kind of a nightmare. And it's also kind of a excuse that Blizzard makes for why balance fucking sucks sometimes.